You've probably heard the teaching, love your friend and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who mistreat you. If you do that, you'll be like your Father in heaven, who causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the nice and the nasty. For if you only love those who love you, do you think you deserve a medal? Anyone can do that. And if you only reach out to your friends, do you think you've earned some kind of a bonus? Anyone can do that. So then, grow up, become mature and complete, just like your Heavenly Father.
It's great Bible reading, isn't it? We've been doing this all year. We've been doing this thing called Big Year, where we've been looking at a different teaching of Jesus each month. And so, gosh, what are we up to? Month 9. I think we've had 8 different themes. And this month, it's love your enemy. You know, I really wanted to do the Big Year and all of these different topics. I wanted to do them for the last couple of years, but it never kind of worked out in like last year or the year before. And the reason I wanted to do it is because I've done this twice before, like just personally, my own kind of personal. I'm going to go through the Big Year and look at these different themes each month and try some of those challenges that are out there every month. And I remember the first time I ever did it, I felt really challenged by the teachings of Jesus. And I thought, do you know, I reckon the good people of MCC Brisbane will find them really relevant too. And so that's why I kind of brought this idea this year of having a big year looking at Jesus' teaching. But you know, what I didn't expect, because I've been through this twice before, what I didn't expect is how hard I would be hit by the teachings of Jesus this third time around. And in the last few months, I've really been struck anew by just how vital the teachings of Jesus are to this world that we live in. I think the last times I did it, I kind of approached it as like, well, this is how I can grow in my faith. Like, this is a sort of personal journey that I'm on. I saw it as a very individual path that I could take, something that I was doing for myself in my own life, in my own little world. But this time I've just been blown away each month as I've realised that Jesus' teachings are, and I've thought really long and hard about using these words, Jesus' teachings are the only hope that the world has. And I feel like I need to unpack that statement because it could probably be misunderstood. Because 2 people came to my door a couple of days ago and they gave me a brochure about how the world was going to end soon and Jesus is the only hope that we have. And that's not really what I'm saying here. And I know people who hold to different religions than Christianity, like Buddhism or Islam, and their faith offers them hope, and their faith has something to say to the world as well. And even though there's lots of differences between the beliefs that each religion teaches, there's also a lot of similarities in the practices between those religions. A lot of religions have an emphasis on loving your neighbour or holding your possessions loosely. Like, that's common ideas to many. So I guess I'm not saying that Christianity is the only religious system that can offer hope and that none of the others do. But this year, as I've thought about the teachings of Jesus in this present moment, like in this world that we're currently living in, and think about that. There's just armed conflicts everywhere. There are places being bombed to hell. There are authoritarian leaders springing up all over the world. There's deliberate disinformation being disseminated that has resulted in actual harm to people. There are protesters on two sides of an issue just hurling abuse at each other. And then I read about paramedics being spat on and bus drivers being attacked. And when retail outlets put up signs that say, "Please respect our staff, we will not tolerate abuse," as if people might not realise that staff should be respected and that we won't tolerate abuse, like that's like new information that we should process. All these things going on around us as if, well, that's just how the world is. And I've just all of that, like living in that and going through the big year at the same time, I've just become so convinced that the teachings of Jesus is the solution that the world desperately needs. The only solution that will actually work. Can you imagine a world where individuals and whole nations love their neighbour? Like, what would that be like? If they loved their neighbour in their hearts and their actions at home and at work, in their foreign policy and in their domestic policy? Imagine if humility, being humble, I think that was March's, maybe it was April's. If humility was this highly sought after character trait that was written into job descriptions of CEOs in the corporate world, and was something that would win you votes if you're a politician, if that was a characteristic that you displayed, how would the absence of arrogance change our workplaces and the way that we collaborated on solving big problems together? How would the economics of our world change if instead of just accumulating more and more and more stuff, we all held our possessions loosely? I think that was May. What would that do to our emissions targets, to the wealth divide, to our landfill problems? What if the blame game that we saw playing out in the media every day, in politics, in our own personal relationships, just simply stopped one day because everybody decided to work on reforming themselves and not others? How would that impact the stats on domestic violence? If all the people in the Greater Brisbane area decided that being hospitable was a really high priority, would we still have a loneliness epidemic? And we know that increased social connection impacts health outcomes, and not just mental health, but health in general. What if just 10% of people in the Greater Brisbane area did nothing more than invite somebody over for dinner once a week? I wonder, would that move the dial on like ambulance ramping or reduce admissions to dementia wards? I don't know, but wouldn't it be an interesting experiment to try? I'm just becoming more and more convinced that if we took Jesus' teaching seriously, it would make a material, measurable difference to the world. But this growing conviction that Jesus is the only hope for the world, it also really scares me and weirdly makes me feel a little bit angry, because following Jesus' teaching is so hard and it's so painful and it requires so much restraint from us. And I feel like Jesus asks so much of us and it just feels impossible. And no month feels more impossible than this one. No teaching asks more of us than this one. Love your enemies. Because love is not a warm, fuzzy emotion. It's not a feeling of attraction, romantic or otherwise. It's an attitude that I cultivate towards other people that says, I'm committed to your welfare. I'm going to consider my welfare, or I'm going to consider your welfare as of equal importance to mine. I'm going to operate in ways that reflects that. I will at times voluntarily choose to put my own wants and needs aside so that you can have your needs and wants fulfilled. I will not write you off as a lesser human being. I will act in your best interests. That's what love is. Enemy. Someone who does not like me. Someone who intends harm towards me. Someone who intentionally tramples on me, holds a grudge against me. Someone who is not committed to my well-being. That's what an enemy is. Love your enemy means wanting the best for someone who doesn't want the best for you. Someone who does not act in my best interests and instead wishes me harm. Love your enemies means acting in that person's best interests. And I reckon that's doable. If by enemy we mean like an annoying work colleague, I think I could do that. Or maybe a friend who's really terrible at paying you back if you go to GYG and they don't have any money with them. I could bring myself to act in their best interests. But then I think about who Jesus was and when he lived and the context that he lived in. He's talking to his own people in his own time. And these are people who were living under the oppression of the Roman Empire. He's talking about loving the soldiers who are enforcing Rome's disproportionate and excessive taxation policies. That might mean you've lost the land that was in your family's care for so many generations because the taxation system put such a burden on landowners that they couldn't afford to keep their land. They lost their land. Rome, whose whole economy is built on the back of slavery, who crucified people if they stood up against the brutality of the way that Rome governed. Love your enemy, Jesus said. Pray for those people who are mistreating you and your family and your community. Does that seem fair? It doesn't seem fair to me. It reminds me of a story that I heard from an organisation that works to reduce the level of conflict in war-torn countries. One of the mediators from this organisation was sitting down with two chiefs, one from rival tribes, two chiefs from two rival tribes. And the mediator was just sitting down and allowing them to talk about the grievances that they had against the other tribe. There was this sad history of just spiralling cycle of violence that had gone on for decades. One of the chiefs had a son who had been murdered by the rival tribe. Well, how is that chief supposed to work with this other one to, somehow bring some kind of peace and reconciliation when his child had been brutally murdered? I don't understand that. How is he expected to collaborate with this other chief whose tribe was responsible for ripping his family apart? It's just too much to expect, isn't it? And yet, as the two chiefs talked together, they came to the realisation that there was no other hope for their respective tribes than to love their enemy. There was no other path forward to ending this misery, the violence, the death, than forgiveness, than letting go of the need to retaliate and making decisions that took into account the well-being of this other tribe. It was the only way forward. Love your enemies, I guess, could be misunderstood. Because I don't think Jesus is saying, give in to your enemies. Let them just take whatever they want, do whatever they want, just lie down and let your enemies walk over you. Resisting your enemy and loving your enemy, they don't have to be incompatible things. Martin Luther King proved that, right? He found creative, non-violent methods of resisting an enemy that actually brought out the humanity of his enemy. And I don't think loving your enemy is an unending self-sacrifice of your own needs and wants that comes from this unhealthy devaluing of your own self, or a need to please others, or an inability to set healthy personal boundaries. That's enabling your enemy. That's not loving your enemy. Because love comes out of health and it comes out of wholeness. And your ability to love increases with personal maturity. And I don't think Jesus is saying avoid accumulating enemies. I mean, if you can avoid accumulating enemies, that sounds like wise advice. But you know, if you're going to walk through life with courage and hold on to your own values, then you're probably going to end up with some enemies. Jesus is saying, treat the enemies that you do have with love. Look out for your enemy just like you'd look out for a friend. You see your enemy's house being broken into? Call the police. Invest in your enemy's well-being. Make choices that are good for your enemy. So what does loving your enemy look like? It's treating your enemy as if she had the same dignity, the same worth in the eyes of God as you have. Because she does. Loving your enemy means not doing something to them that you wouldn't do to a friend. So when someone watches how I treat someone, how I talk about someone, you shouldn't be able to tell whether that person is my enemy or my friend. Because according to Jesus, a fully mature, grown-up adult, a fully mature human being treats both enemy and friend with the same respect and the same concern. And doing so demonstrates our family resemblance to our Heavenly Father, who sends rain on the farmers who treat people well and sends rain on the farmers who treat people poorly. God makes his sun to rise on the nice and the nasty. He doesn't design a weather system that rewards one and punishes the other. So if you think that you're a mature Christian, an emotionally mature human being, well, here's an easy way to either confirm or question that self-perception. Simply ask yourself, how do I talk about the people who don't like me? Or the people that I dislike? How do I talk about my enemies? Because if I talk about them in ways that diminish their human dignity, that casts doubt on their intrinsic worth and value as people made in the image of God, then I'm not demonstrating this maturity that Jesus is pointing to. If I call them names, if I label them with pejorative terms, if I make broad, general, sweeping generalizations about their intelligence or their motivations or their character, then I still have some growing up to do. And I can safely say that I still have some growing up to do. I don't know about you. But it's hard, isn't it? Like, this stuff is not easy. And it still feels a little bit unfair. And it still makes me feel a little bit like, really? Do we have to do this? But there's no other hope. There's no other way forward than to love our enemies. So if you want to be involved in changing the world, if you want to do something really radical that will make a difference to this crazy world that we live in, then give loving your enemy a go. Treat your enemy and your friend alike and see what happens. Because I think it's the only hope that we have for the world.